In this video, I'll go over 4 different ways to get the proportions from your study onto the drawing paper. This way should be familiar. I've taped my proportion drawing to the sliding glass door, and this is a sheet of drawing paper. And you can clearly see that I can see through the paper well enough to trace the features. You have a few sheets of very thick drawing paper, and the one I taped up here is actually ripped in half. You should use the thick drawing paper for your self-portrait. So if your proportion study is good, you can just trace it. The second method that I'll show you is to use a grid. On the right-hand side is a copy with a 1-inch square grid on it, and on the left-hand side I increased the size of the grid to 1¼ inches. And so this makes the drawing larger. You can easily enlarge or reduce a drawing by simply changing the size of the grid. Here what I'm doing is looking at the photograph and finding the places where the side of the face intersects with the grid. And you don't have to have this absolutely perfect. I'm basically looking at it's 1/4 of the way or half the way, and I'm making some dots and then connecting them. So method number 2 is use a grid and connect the dots. Here I've sped the video up just so you can see how the dot process works. This method can very accurately enlarge or reduce the drawing that's already made, or a photograph in this case. So it's very accurate, but it's not very interesting, and it's actually kind of boring in the end. It feels like tracing, and in a way it is tracing, because the original image on the right-hand side is already turned into 2 dimensions through photography. I'm using a photograph intentionally just to show you how this would work. If you have a good proportion study, just draw a grid lightly on that and use your proportion study to transfer to the drawing paper. My recommendation is to draw everything very lightly. I have to draw dark enough for the camera to pick up the lines. I would not draw this dark if I were doing this without the camera. I find this method useful for getting the big objects in the right place and in the right proportions. As I'm working here, you can probably tell that I actually miss a bit with the eye. You really have to step back and look at what you've drawn. Even though you're using a grid, it may not be quite accurate. Here's the third method I want to show you. I'm going to just start again with drawing, and I'm using Vine charcoal on a piece of sketchpad paper. And I'm just going to draw again. I didn't draw this way when I made the original proportion study, and I thought you should see this as well. I'm going to find the proportions on the paper. What I mean by this is I'm going to block in masses and light and dark areas and erase and change until things look the way I want them to. This is probably the least accurate way of transferring proportions, but to be honest with you, this was the most fun drawing to make. In the end, it's the least accurate, but to me that isn't really as important sometimes as the experience of drawing in the first place. I find that smearing the Vine charcoal around and softening it a bit allows me to go back in and put lines where they actually belong. So none of this seems permanent until I decide it is. I can always erase the Vine charcoal. As you can tell, I've sped these drawings up a bit more than normal, and that's just to keep the length of the video shorter. I think that it's important for you to see that I change things multiple times. I don't change things once and think it's in the correct place. I'll oftentimes draw something and erase it and draw it again and erase it and draw it again and erase it. And in that way I can work my way towards accuracy rather than assume that the line that I put on the paper is where it's supposed to be. Giving myself permission to change my mind makes the drawing process much more enjoyable. You can also tell I'm putting in some values, and this face is clearly too skinny, but it's also very expressive, and I think that's okay. I've slowed the video back down so that you can see that I'm going to add some fine details with a pencil at the end. Use the tool that seems appropriate. We're on to the fourth method here, and you'll see that I'm not going to draw any circles or dividing lines or measure anything. I'm just going to draw. And this is the way that I would normally approach a drawing like this. I find that the experience that I have in making the previous versions is probably helpful, but I'm just looking at my subject and drawing what I see. I'm intentionally making this face a little larger than the photograph, just so you can see that I'm not going one-to-one. I'm drawing this larger on purpose. You'll notice that one of the first things I do is draw one of the eyes, and that's because in my brain somehow I'm calculating the sizes of things based on that eye. At the end of the drawing, that eye is all wrong. It looks like an eye in an Egyptian sculpture that's staring straight out of the paper. So it's the last thing I'll fix when I finish, but that eye is helping me to sort out the rest of the drawing. I guess you could say that I'm doing some of this intuitively. My brain is measuring things as I draw. Of course, my intuition's wrong, so I have to erase a lot. There's clearly nothing wrong with that. With the video sped up, it's really funny to watch, but you can see that I don't just draw one thing completely. I'll go from one area to another, and this will help me to determine if things are in proportion with each other. Again, drawing a perfect mouth or a perfect nostril doesn't matter if it doesn't go with the rest of the drawing. As a reminder, once again, I'm drawing very dark with a soft pencil just for the sake of the camera. The soft pencil erases very well, which is fortunate, but I would never draw this dark if I weren't filming. The benefit of what I'm doing is I could be drawing right on the drawing paper here. I will have to transfer this because the lines are so dark, but if I were drawing on the drawing paper, I wouldn't have to transfer the dimensions at all, and my drawing would be straight off my hand from start to finish. I think it's important for you to realize that I'm showing you 4 different ways to transfer proportions from one place to another so that you can choose the method that works best for you in your circumstances. I don't really want you to trace a photograph. That's not very interesting. I do want you to try and learn how things work by figuring it out on a piece of paper. Since I'm drawing on paper, I have to erase the eyes several times until I get them right. If I were drawing on a computer, I would just make a selection and enlarge the eye or turn the eye, and it's actually quicker to work sometimes on the computer because you can look at it and decide that, oh, it's just a little bit crooked, and then you can change it. On a piece of paper, you basically have to do that. You need to just go right back in with the eraser. You can probably tell these eyes are a little bit too big. It's almost like manga eyes. And I think that's part of the expression in this drawing that I really like. It's not accurate, but it's expressive. And I think that I'll go with this one in my finished drawing. Since I filmed these drawings, I can tell you that each one of the methods took about 15 minutes. Actually, tracing the proportion drawing's the fastest way to go, but this drawing is 15 minutes from start to finish, and drawing the grid is 15 minutes. They're all about the same amount of time.